Hello, welcome to CBC. You are watching Frankly Speaking Analytical Program. I'm Bakhtar Hassanov in Baku, and my guest is Matthew Bryza. He's a former OSCE Minsk Group U.S. co-chair and former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. He will talk about a range of issues, including the settlement process of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Hello, Mr. Bryza.
Hello, Bakhtar. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bryza, recently Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev participated in NATO's Warsaw Summit, and where the president drew the attention to the settlement of the protracted Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. What do you think? How can NATO promote to the settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict?
Well, in terms of the formal process of mediation, there's no direct role for NATO. As we all know, it's a negotiating process under the auspices of the OSCE. But that said, I think that ultimately the only way we're going to get to a final political settlement of the entire conflict is if the heads of state and foreign ministers of the United States and France, together with their NATO and EU allies, make a settlement, an issue on the agenda of their own relations with Russia. Because the presidents of Azerbaijan and Armenia have no reason at this point to trust each other. They've gone through a traumatic experience in early April, as well as a few years where the negotiations weren't moving forward, after getting, I would argue, quite close to agreement on the basic principles. So to restart the momentum and to build the trust that's needed to take the final difficult decisions, you need these Minsk Group co-chair, I would say, presidents to be providing the political cover like an umbrella so that the populations of Azerbaijan and Armenia can agree that the difficult decisions that their presidents will take will be good ones. So NATO can help when there's a discussion of the strategic importance for the NATO member countries, for their heads of state, to help there be a settlement and to push then maybe the US and French presidents to be more involved.
So overall, how do you assess Azerbaijan's participation at the Warsaw Summit?
Well, Azerbaijan was invited, I suppose, as a NATO partner, and that's important. Very good that Azerbaijan was there, very good that President Aliyev was able to get the conflict discussion on the agenda of NATO. It's not possible for Nagorno-Karabakh to be one of the central themes, of course, of the NATO summit. Now, as you well know, NATO is preoccupied with deterring a resurgent Russian military threat to NATO's own territory. NATO thought that that era was over, thought the Cold War was finished, and the Cold War is finished, but wanted to believe that even under President Putin, there was no reason to worry about deterring Russia militarily within NATO space, and that's no longer the case. So deterring further Russian aggression beyond Ukraine and into the NATO space required the lion's share of the deliberations, their conventional military forces to discuss, even NATO nuclear weapons doctrine in response to Russia's nuclear weapons threats. So it's not possible to have an in-depth discussion of Nagorno-Karabakh in that environment. But that doesn't matter because, again, it's important, first of all, that the leaders of the countries realize it's dangerous just to let the conflict drift.
And as you know, the Azerbaijani and Armenian presidents met twice this year in Vienna and St. Petersburg for the negotiations on the settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And what's your opinion about the outcomes of these meetings?
I think it's important, first of all, that they happened. It's positive anytime Presidents Aliyev and Sarkisyan sit down together. Presidents Aliyev and Sarkisyan were able to agree on a series of important measures to stabilize the line of contact, to reduce the risk of open warfare again, and to reduce tension. And I think it's going to take some time to reduce the tension. First, you have to implement those agreements from Vienna. I think at St. Petersburg they talked more about that. And so once then the military tension is settled, then they can get back to a serious discussion of the fundamental political principles of a settlement. And that requires the full Minsk Group to participate. And I look forward to that happening. I hope the foreign ministers of the US and France and Russia will all participate in something like that.
So, Mr. Bryza, what do you think? Why there is no international pressure on Armenia in regards to the fulfillment of the 4 UN resolutions on the settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict? Why the international community avoids any pressure on Armenia?
Yeah, it's a question I've thought about a lot over all these years. And the answer, there are two parts to the answer. One is there are very many United Nations Security Council resolutions that never get enforced and get forgotten about. You may recall that that's what happened in the case of Iraq, with Saddam Hussein having not implemented so many resolutions. eventually the international community felt pretty strongly, led by the United States, about implementing those resolutions. The second part of the answer, though, is that there is a promising negotiating forum. The OSCE Minsk Group actually has existed, has done a lot. I know the conventional wisdom is it hasn't done anything or enough. I would agree it hasn't done maybe enough. The Minsk Group hasn't done enough. But it's not accurate to say it hasn't done anything. It has helped the parties get very close to a breakthrough. So I think what happens then is when international actors like the United States are contemplating enforcing UN Security Council resolutions, they all think that, well, you know, we don't want to jeopardize this ongoing negotiating process either. And so we don't want to put so much pressure on one aspect of the negotiations, because return of the territories, as you well understand, is a crucial element among several that will form a final agreement. So again, what I'm trying to say with too many words is that the countries like the United States, Russia, other Security Council members, France, UK, China, they don't want to jeopardize the possibility for a comprehensive settlement by putting pressure on one of the actors to give a big concession that in a negotiating process needs to be rewarded with other concessions. So it's a process answer, but it's the truth. If the negotiating process broke down completely, and if that was Armenia's fault, I think you'd see more pressure. But nobody wants to get to the point where the negotiating process ends, because then that leaves Azerbaijan with few good options, if any, to resolve the conflict on its terms.
Mr. Bryza, as you know, recently a coup attempt was thwarted in Turkey, which was aimed at toppling the democratically elected president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. What's your opinion on this issue?
Yeah, well, I live in Turkey. I live in Istanbul. And last Friday night and Saturday morning seems like I was living in a different country. And that an enormous amount of time has passed. It's hard to believe it's only 5 days, 6 days. That was a very serious attempt at a coup that was this close to succeeding. I, for the life of me, can't understand what the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was talking about when he said this was a failed coup, the leaders of it were, he suggested, incompetent, it wasn't well organized. It was extremely well organized. There was a moment where the coup plotters had F-16 fighters flying just above the main streets of Ankara, helicopter gunships bombing Parliament. They had taken over control of the state TV broadcaster. They were on their way to take over CNN Turk, the other major, or the biggest other network. They had closed the Bosporus bridges. They had just about won, except that, thanks to Apple and FaceTime and CNN Turk not having yet been captured by the coup plotters, President Erdogan was able to make his appeal to the people, broadcast, as we know, onto the mobile phone of a TV journalist like you. And the people responded. And they responded, many of them because they really admire President Erdogan, but many of them also simply because they realize whether or not they like President Erdogan, democracy is imperiled by a military coup. And so we saw a reflection of that broader sentiment of support for fighting the coup the next couple of days later, when all four parties represented in Turkish parliament, including all three opposition parties, issued a joint statement. The only thing I've ever heard of them agreeing on, frankly, except maybe when to go on vacation, a joint statement condemning the coup. So the outcome was good in a way, in that people came out at least in support of democratic processes. But the longer-term outcome could be more problematic. We now see that the United States, the European Union, individual countries of the European Union are criticizing President Erdogan for what they call overreaching, going too far, and firing so many people and imprisoning so many people. That debate will be argued for a while. From my perspective, the truth of the matter is that many dangerous people are still roaming around. Today there was an announcement that 7 special forces, highly trained people who know how to assassinate, can't be accounted for. Something like 14 naval boats and ships are missing. 28 helicopters, military helicopters, no one knows where they are. So there's still a threat out there. And President Erdogan, I think it's true, he had prepared a long list of people that he would arrest if they ever got to a crisis like this, people in the Fethullah Gülen movement. I don't think that means that he pre-planned this, as some people are claiming. This whole coup attempt was false. It was a real coup attempt. It almost succeeded, and he was ready to respond in case anything like this were to happen in Turkey, and it did happen.
So what do you think, what does the stability in Turkey mean for the West and especially for the U.S.?
I wish people in the U.S. and more broadly in NATO and the EU were asking themselves that exact question. Stability of Turkey is crucially important. Think of the real estate, the location of Turkey geographically. Look at countries at borders. Yes, a small bit of Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan, Armenia, Georgia, so it's a Caucasus country, but it borders Iran, Iraq, Syria, Russia, across the Black Sea, the Balkans as well, Greece. So Turkey is a NATO country with the second biggest army in NATO that borders the two most significant national security threats of the United States right now, Russia and Syria. That's a place where you want stability. Not to mention it's one of only two democracies in the Middle East, Israel being the other one. Yes, we can complain about the pace at which democracy is moving forward or backward, but Turkey's stability is absolutely essential from a strategic perspective. So the first thing the United States leaders ought to be doing is what President Obama did after Secretary Kerry failed to, which is to say, we stand with our NATO ally Turkey. We support what happened to fight the coup, to defeat the coup. We support Turkey's democracy. That needed to be a clear statement from the very beginning. Secretary Kerry was slow in saying that, and that has led to the misperception among many people in Turkey, not just the ruling political party, but many of my own friends in business, that the United States might have wanted the coup to happen. So by being slow and unclear and underscoring how important Turkey's strategic stability is to us as a NATO ally, we made a huge mistake and have only made the problem worse.
My last question is about the energy projects. How could you describe the importance of the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline and a ton of projects for the US and the West and also EU?
So for the U.S., all of those pipelines, going back even to BTC, South Caucasus Gas Pipeline, which we in the U.S. government, I would argue, played a significant role in helping the countries and companies come together. U.S. companies have virtually no interest in those. I mean, ExxonMobil hated that the U.S. government was involved with Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. There are no U.S. companies that are going to be exporting natural gas via TANAP and a Trans-Adriatic Pipeline. No U.S. investments. So this is our U.S. interest in that set of projects is purely deriving from our interest in the stability, the economic success of Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, and then our EU allies. So TANAP and Trans-Adriatic Pipeline and South Caucasus Pipeline X, the expansion, are crucial to establishing a new land route to help the European Union diversify their supplies of gas. So the project is much more important than simply the 16 BCM of gas it will provide, 10 to Turkey, or 6 to Turkey, 10 to Europe. It's much more important symbolically, and it will be much larger in coming years. It will expand up to maybe 35 BCM. So it's a crucially important project. It's a way for Azerbaijan to make itself safer. But it's also a way for Azerbaijan to help the rest of the West understand how important a strategic partner Azerbaijan is, and that it also, like I was talking about Turkey, requires our support. Maybe not a NATO ally, but still a country whose success is necessary for our success.
Thank you, Mr. Bryza, for your comprehensive replies to the questions.
I thank you.
This was Matthew Bryza, former U.S. OSCE Minsk Group co-chair and former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. It's all for today. Thank you for watching.